sky. Landed in a field, baby, next to I-35. Well, I don't know what they want, but it might be you and I. 25 more. Hey, what's going on, folks? It's Moot Davis, and this is another installment of the Moot Point Podcast. Hope everybody's doing good out there. I am doing good over here. We've wrapped up all of our United States shows for the year, and have one more show coming up in France over the Thanksgiving weekend. Other than that, this coming Sunday, I'm headed to Tampa, Florida to begin rehearsals for the next installment of the $1 Million Quartet musical play that I am in for Norwegian Cruise Line. So I've signed up for another 6-month contract, so I will be gainfully employed until May 15th, 2017. So, again, it's minimal work and lots of hanging around the Caribbean for the next few months. So it'll be a good way to spend the winter and pass the time down there. Anyway, as I've said, we finished up most of our shows for the year, and the album is in post-production. It's all recorded. It's completely finished. And we're sort of just finishing up everything on the back end of it and shopping it around a little bit and trying to get a label to come to the party and help us get it out there so it can actually do something instead of just sort of dying in the mud with nobody ever getting to hear it or hear of it. So that's what's going on. And I thought it'd be a good time to check in and maybe interview one of the other bandmates that I pal around with quite often. So today we're going to be talking to guitarist extraordinaire, Mr. Bill Corvino. We have been rolling together for quite a number of years now, and I think this interview came out really good. I'm going to break it into 2 parts. So this is a 2-parter interview, my interview with Bill Corvino. Here we go. All right. Let's start with where you're from and all that good stuff.
I am from Audubon, New Jersey, born and raised.
Right.
And I currently live in Beverly, New Jersey.
Right.
So I made it a half an hour north.
It's a big trip. All right. And so how old were you when you first got into music?
I started playing clarinet when I was in 4th grade in school. And then when I was in 5th grade, my sister, one of my older sisters, she's 6 years older than me, she asked my mom about taking guitar lessons. So my parents got us a guitar, and actually my mom decided to have me take lessons along with her.
Okay. So
my sister took lessons. We both took lessons from this guy, Jack Deal, in Audubon at the local music store. And I think my sister lasted for about a year or so until she had the intro to locomotive breath or something like that. And then, and then she phased out on it. I think she maybe took lessons for like a year, and then I just continued on and then when I was about 12, this is kind of a long story.
That's all right. That's
you can edit this all out.
No.
Everybody get comfortable. When I was about 12, I remember we were going on our 6th grade safety patrol trip, and we had, for some reason, they scheduled like a sex education talk before the trip. So I remember going to it with my dad, and it was kind of like this situation where all the boys went in one room with a doctor, and all the dads went into another room. And I remember the whole session was just kind of like everybody giggling and sort of making remarks that were above my head, and I had no idea what was going on.
Right.
I still probably don't. And so I was pretty confused and had no idea what anybody was talking about.
Uh-huh.
And I remember I went home that night with my dad, and I don't think we talked at all in the car. So the confusion continued, and I remember walking in my front door, and for some reason I just have this distinct memory of walking in the front door of our house and feeling kind of weird about the night. And remember my sister Diane, the next one older than Karen, who took guitar lessons, I just remember they were watching the Grammys, and the Grammys were on, just coincidentally, and they were sitting in the living room, and I remember her turning to me when I walked in and saying, "It's really gross, isn't it?" And maybe me thinking like, yeah, I kind of confused. And I remember at that moment, like I sat down next to her on the couch, and on the Grammys, it was right around the time when Miles Davis came out of his retirement / coke addiction or whatever, and was releasing albums at that time. And I had never seen or heard or anything about him or jazz or any of that kind of stuff. And I just remember they announced him, he came out, and it was like 5 minutes of like a group of people playing what seemed to me to be completely wrong notes, and Miles just with his back to the audience in some kind of crazy space gold lame something or other, just hunched over, just blowing like a red trumpet or something, blowing all these bizarre notes that made no sense and seemed to be all completely wrong. And when he was done, he just sort of walked off, like, no acknowledgement of the audience or anything. And I just thought in my head, like, I have no idea. Like, that was as confusing as what just happened at the school. I don't know what that guy was just doing or what any of those people were doing, but that was the coolest freaking thing I've ever seen in my life. Right. And I went to bed that night with my little transistor radio under the covers, like cliche, under the covers of the radio, going up and down the dial, going, I don't know what that was, but I have to find more. And finding like the, what Paul Westerberg calls, left of the dial, like the low numbers on the radio, like 90.1 in Philly and 90.9 and 88.5, which at that time was a really cool sort of underground, college station. And finding like the jazz station, and then right next to that was the punk station. It was all this music that I had never been exposed to, with typical like commercial Philly radio, Bruce Springsteen and all, which I love, but had never been exposed to that kind of Coltrane and crazy out stuff and punk rock, and was completely like obsessed. At that point, that's when I became like obsessed. Like my paper route money would be saved, and I'd ride the bike up to this little record store in the Westmont Plaza near my house and buy Miles Davis. I just remember the guy behind the counter. I'd be like this little scrawny 12-year-old kid coming up, walking up with, buying, Giant Steps by John Coltrane or the Sex Pistols or whatever, the Ramones, and him just always looking over. Like, okay, cool. and that was, I just kind of became obsessed, just sort of living in my room, listening to, writing down the names of people that I hear on the radio, and then going to the record store and trying to find those records, and then certain punk labels having like catalogs in there where you could order other records, and discovering, Sonic Youth and Husker Du and all that kind of stuff. So that really got me kind of obsessed, sort of the jazz and a lot of punk rock and stuff when I was a teenager and junior high and all that stuff. That's when I kind of became obsessed with it. And I had a really cool teacher that when he realized, when I started asking questions about that kind of music, that whatever kind of music, he would go digging his vinyl records and hand me something and go, you need to listen to this or you need to listen to that. So I would make like cassette copies of his records. Like I just take my little boom box and sit it in front of the stereo speaker and put a cassette in and make a crappy copy of whatever he handed me, Ralph Towner or strange stuff. So I got kind of really obsessed with that, and I was pretty much the cliche geek kid,
Yeah.
like before that was, I guess, kind of codified or whatever. But I mean, so I was kind of like the typical sitting in my room alone. I'd race home and listen to the radio and play guitar and listen to records. And
Right.
That was pretty much life.
And then, like, how early on in your like guitar playing stuff did it really make sense to you? Because I think, or does it work like that? Did it really like just click? Like, oh, I understand this instrument, and though it's going to take a lot of practice and all that. Like, you had just sort of a real understanding of it, or because that's never happened for me. Like it's always like a struggle just to eke out one little thing, and it's usually a mistake, and and then I run with it, but.
I don't know if I don't know if I even feel currently like I know what the hell I'm doing. I mean, I just think it's like, not to be maudlin about it, but that it's this continuing journey. But I mean, I guess when I was in high school, I remember like some cool kids around the corner found out I played guitar and I had an amp, and so I'd go hang out at their house, and I just remember like this friend of mine, Greg, he had this old 3-story house, and we used to set up in his attic. We'd carry everything all the way up to his attic, and it would be like 120 degrees up there. And we'd all have our shirts off.
Yeah.
Drinking stale beer that his brother bought for us, and we'd play, Zeppelin and stuff for like 6-8 hours at a time, like, until the cops came, because it was we'd have the windows open and somebody would invariably call, and the cops would come over, and that was just like the coolest feeling, because we were actually making music, like creating it, and so I just remember spending hours in his attic. Mm-hmm. And those guys were really into metal, so we play like Judas Priest and all that stuff for hours and hours and hours and hours, and just like soloing over it and stuff, and just exploring. I don't know. I guess I had a pretty fairly decent handle on things when I got to college, but that was a really deep experience. I was kind of like diving into a pool of people where there were people, when I went to school, across the hall from me was this kid, Roy Hargrove, who is this huge trumpet player. He's played with everybody, and he was a year younger than me, and had already been touring the world with big people. So you show up, and you're practicing in your room, and the guy across the hall just flew in from Japan. Recording some live record for Blue Note or something. So it was pretty intimidating. Yeah. And I was really, really like debilitatingly shy when I was younger. And so I had a lot of trouble in school and stuff, just trying, like, having to take that music and then play out in front of people and be calm. And that really was a mess. Right. Like trying to get comfortable with playing in front of people and being able to do that. So it took me a long time to kind of build my confidence up.
Yeah. Now, what kind of student were you in school?
Just in general, like high school?
Yeah, just what, like regular courses and stuff like that.
I did really well academic. I actually graduated. Did I ever tell you this?
No,
I graduated valedictorian.
Really? Look at you.
Look at me now. But yeah. So yeah.
That's awesome.
That kind of stuff came. I mean, that kind of came easy to me, or it depended on the course. But I mean, like, yeah, I enjoyed school, studying and stuff, and
And outside of music, what would you say were your favorites?
Courses?
Yeah.
Like study. I liked English, and I liked I had the best class I took in high school, the one I always remember, and I always remember the teacher and everything, was physics, which was, it just was, it was just mind blowing to me. The course, the guy that taught it, George McCullough, he was a great teacher, and the whole course, it was the first time I ever took a course where like the whole thing kind of had a point to it at the end, like at the end of the year there was sort of like a, it was like reading a book and coming to the final chapter, and it was like an extremely well put together course, and it was, I was never like, probably my weakest subject was like calculus or any kind of like, upper level kind of algebra 3 or whatever, because I couldn't really look at it as just like abstract, like just letters and numbers. But with physics, I could do the calc because I could think of a wave or a part. I could picture it in my head. So it might take me an hour to finish the problem, whereas it might take somebody else 15 minutes. But I would come up with the same answer, just in a roundabout way, because I could close my eyes and think about it in my head.
Yeah.
So, but I really enjoyed that class a lot.
Yeah.
That was my favorite, definitely.
Wild. and getting back to like performing music in front of people, and sort of how did you overcome sort of that shyness that you're talking about?
Jameson. Yeah. So, yeah, that was, I would drink. And when that became a problem, I sort of gave that up. But,
right.
But, yeah, I just kind of kept doing it. I kept doing it, even though, I would have experiences where I would be, when I was younger, like playing in front of people and cracking, like just falling apart. Yeah. Being unable to operate a guitar. Like, I just kept hammering into it until I had, the way I look at it is, at this point in my life, I've had every disaster that you could possibly have happen to me on stage. Right. Like, I've had every disaster, whether it was blanking out mentally or equipment failure or falling over something or, you know what I mean? Right. Like, I've had every possible catastrophe happen. So right. I've seen it all and right. walked away from it, right. and cried in my car or whatever. So, I there's not much that can. Yeah. Like, I mean, I don't know if I'm used to it is the right word, but like, I've experienced every disaster. So, sure. I feel like at this point in my life, like I feel like at this point, I've overcome that. Like I don't really have that anymore. Yeah. And then the last several years working with you, mm-hmm. has been like the final part of that, because I mean, sitting in a room across from Kenny Vaughan, who, I like listened to his recordings prior to that, like incessantly, like drove, I mean, even up to stuff he was doing right before, we recorded with him. I was driving my wife crazy at home playing, right, Marty Stewart records and stuff with him on there, and then sitting, or listening to Williams or whatever, and then sitting in a room across from him was, I always say that the very first recording session we did, it was a really good thing that Joe and I drove 12 hours through the night. Like, I got done teaching the night before, and Joe picked me up, and we drove straight to Nashville, and we got there at about 7 a.m. Right. Laid down for, I don't know, an hour. Right. Which I just basically laid there with my eyes wide open, and then got up and took a shower, and then we were recording by 10. Right. So I think that actually helped out, because by the time he walked in and we were set up and the red light was on, like, I was completely so fried, completely numb. So it's like, hey Kenny, let's play, yeah. And that was probably a good thing, because it kind of broke the, whatever, we did the first session and right. did the first couple songs were in the can, and so I wasn't really fazed by his
right.
eccentricities.
Right. So now, the recording session that we're talking about is this was the very first session for what would eventually become the Goin'In Hot album. And I think, did we record 3 songs that day?
2.
Two songs. And do you remember what they were?
They were Food Stamps and Midnight Train.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, and then based on how well those went to us, we decided that, we would stick around and do the rest of the album with Kenny, because I think at the time I was talking to Mark Ford of the ex-guitarist from the Black Crowes, and we were sort of talking about doing it out in California, and I forget exactly why we went into the studio with Kenny. I think maybe it was just to get maybe the country ones out of the way before we get into I'm not sure what the thought process was at this point.
You had you had said that we were going to do the honky tonk songs with him, and then the more rock and stuff with Mark. But then that session went so smoothly,
right,
that that you decided to stay with that setup.
Yeah, it seemed to work really well.
Yeah.
Now, there's the funny story of when I went and recorded the Man About Town album with Kenny. He had actually sent you a Facebook message saying how much he liked your guitar playing, but you didn't get it for a year. Like, it was trapped in one of your some account. So what was that story?
Yeah. When you went down to Nashville and recorded Man About Town, and so I figured, I might as well send him send Kenny a friend invite or a message on Facebook or whatever, and just say, hey, Kenny,
right.
And so I did. I just kind of sent him some dorky message saying, I'm Bill, and I was the guitarist on the demo recordings, and, love your playing, and, Man About Town sounded great.
Yeah.
And so I sent him this message, and couple of months went by, and I didn't see, there was no return message, so I was like, okay, all right, whatever, no big deal. I just thought I'd throw it out there, and a year later, I remember I was working on something, because I'm kind of a lot of times working in the middle of the night because I have children, so a lot of times the only time to work is the dead of night. I'll brew a pot of coffee and work on something, and I was taking a break. Came up from the basement, and I was just I was reading on Facebook. Somebody had posted something about, there's this in your message folder, there's this other folder marked other. And if you click on other, there are these messages from people that are from either people that aren't friends with you at that, technically, or whatever. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I went over to the message file and clicked on other. I was like, oh, there's that other thing they were talking about. I clicked on it, and the first message there was Kenny Vaughan from a year ago. So he must have responded within, and I clicked on it, and I was just like, oh my God, and he was he's like, hey Bill, I loved your playing on the demo, and you guys, the band sounded great, and you guys should have recorded this stuff, and the band sounds, and I was floored, because I had not had contact with people in the, the game, whatever, before, just some jerk from Beverly. So him writing that, it was a really nice paragraph, it wasn't just hey, yeah, great, but it was a fully composed paragraph, that was really, really complimentary, and it meant a lot to me. I nearly fell off the chair when I read it.
Yeah.
I just remember I just went outside and smoked about 12 cigarettes in a row, and then finally my wife got up, and I was like, hey, come downstairs and read this, and it's Kenny, so it was a big moment for me. Yeah,
totally. And then what was your whole take on the Goin'In Hot sort of sessions, and just everything from when we started and working with Kenny, and just anything that jumps out at you, the whole ordeal.
No, it was really cool. It was cool working with Joe. Is it McMahon?
McMahon, I think, right?
McMahon is how you pronounce it. I never was sure of the pronunciation, but he was really cool. He's an excellent guitar player, also, and
right.
And it was it was a lot of work in a short amount of time, and a lot of times they had me plugged into sort of exotic gear and stuff that I wasn't used to. So sometimes it was a little disorienting because Kenny would, and this is not criticism or anything, but like he would say, they'd have me plugged into some boutique amp going through some vintage gear that I had. I literally at one point asked him, I think he had me plugged into an Echoplex, and which I had read about, and but I had never been in the same room with one, and I remember he plugged in and he's like, yeah, this is gonna be great. And I remember looking up at him and saying, "Where's the on button?" So, but yeah, there was a lot of gear that I wasn't familiar with, so it was some of the sounds were a little unfamiliar, and or it was sometimes slightly disorienting that way.
Right.
And we recorded it primarily live, which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
But there, I remember it was really cool. There were a couple times where Kenny had like a Marty gig or something. Like he was playing with the Ryman or something one night, some crazy thing. And so he left early, and I remember you and Mike left, and Joe went to sleep in one of the beds or something.
Right.
And it was just me and Joe, the engineer, kind of staring at each other. So, I had been that day. Gary Morse had been putting his parts down, so I had been kind of like in a bedroom in the house where the studio was, and had been kind of working on a part for Used to Call It Love.
Oh, right.
I remember kind of the whole week I'd been eyeing this Telecaster that was on Joe's wall. That had these flat wound 13s, these cables on it, and I was like, oh man, I bet that would sound good through Kenny's Princeton.
Yeah.
And so everybody left.
Yeah.
So Joe's like, well, what do you want to do? You got time, So and when Kenny had left, when he was leaving, he was like, hey, if there's anything you want to do, redo or whatever. So I just remember it was really nice and peaceful.
Yeah.
It was just Joe in there and me in the room. So I just asked Joe if I could use that telly. He was like, yeah, man, you can use whatever you want. And so I remember I plugged that into Kenny's Princeton amp that was in the bathroom, and put that part down, 2 takes or whatever, because I had been playing it for a couple hours in the other room, when Gary was doing his parts, and so I had the part, did it in 2 takes or whatever, and it came out really, really nice. I mean, the guitar sounded beautiful, and the amp sounded beautiful, and it was just, I was really, really comfortable because there was nobody there.
Yeah, sure.
And I remember Kenny coming in the next day. I was really, it was my other proud moment with him was I remember I was sitting in the kitchen, and Kenny was putting down backing vocals on something. It was the final day they were just throwing a couple of backing vocals on stuff, and I just remember him stopping and coming in and making a point of saying, that the guitar part was fantastic, and it was really I was like, oh, thank you.
Yeah. When we went in for that first session, and I think maybe the first song we did was Midnight Train, and what was his note to you? Remember he pulled you aside and said, I want you to play this do you remember?
You were, he said, do you drink? And I said, well, that's a loaded question. And I said, no, not currently. And he said, well, I want you to play this like you're hopped up on pills, and it's the last set, and you're out of control, and I could definitely think back to dialing that up from the past. So,
yeah.
So Yeah, that was his advice, to play it like I was bonked out of my head.
And it really sounds like it's coming off the rails, that song. I love it. So I think here's a good spot to take a break, and we'll listen to Midnight Train. We're here with Bill Corvino.
Go. Well, I said, damn that midnight train. This whiskey gonna rot my brain. And I'm gonna find out fast, girl, when I'm all alone. Why is it every time I try to leave you in the middle of the night, that damned old train, girl, it ain't ever on time. So I said, damn that midnight train. And this whiskey gonna rot my brain. And I'm gonna find out fast, girl, when I'm all alone. So I said, damn that midnight train, and this whiskey gonna rot my brain. And I'm gonna find out fast, girl, when I'm all alone. Well, you run all over this town with every guy around, and then you wonder why I'm always blue. I'll tell you, fate must have it out for me, because it always happens to me. I'll be down on the tracks, girl, just waiting to go. Yeah, but my damn train ain't ever on time. Oh, never breaks this heart of mine. 'Cause I gotta swallow my pride, girl, and crawl on back home. So I said, damn that midnight train, and this whiskey gonna rot my brain. And I'm gonna find out fast, girl, when I'm all alone. Yeah, but one day down the line, my train's gonna be on time, and I'll be on it, baby, and you can kiss my ass goodbye. But till then, it's a damn that midnight train, and this whiskey gonna rot my brain. And I'm gonna find out fast, girl, when I'm all alone. I said, damn that midnight train, and this whiskey gonna rot my brain. And I'm gonna find out fast, girl, when I'm all alone. Well, I'm gonna find out fast, girl, when I'm all alone.
All right, folks, that's our first part of the interview with Bill Corvino. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed talking to Bill. That was probably one of the most sensible and least violent conversations we've ever had. Anyway, I'll put up part 2 here shortly, and we'll go from there. Be sure to rate and review the podcast series whenever you can. It's a big help on iTunes. And yeah, if you have any questions, shoot me a message at moot@mootdavis.com. All right, everybody, be cool and look for part 2 coming up shortly. Later.